Hi, I'm Mr. Miyagi and this is Mr. Miyagi's workshop. We're going to remove this front wheel on this episode. I'm going to pull the cotter pin out of there. This is a 22 millimeter nut on these axles. Oh man, let me torque that down good. So you want to screw these out. Now on the opposite side here, we have two nuts on the bottom of the fork that you have to loosen up to remove the axle. You don't have to take them all the way off, you just need to loosen that up a fair amount. Now one thing I also want to mention at this time, I've got a little lift on a little scissor jack that's lifted this front end up. I've got the back strapped here to the ground. You can pick any point on it. I just happen to have a good point here. And I also have some straps in this area that go down to the bench down here. And you can see my lift jack here in the center. It raises it. So you want to be safe when you do this, people. Sometimes these axles will come out easy, and sometimes they don't come out so easy. So sometimes you have to persuade them. I have a dead blow here that works quite well. So you don't want to lift it too far off the table. You just want it barely touching. And so that's when you pull your wheel doesn't drop. And here's the axle. We'll put everything back together on it so we don't lose it. And this looks pretty good. This has been oiled. So every time you either put your axle back in, it's really good idea to oil or grease that axle when you're putting it in. It'll make it easier if you ever have to pull it out. Sometimes these will roll right out of here, and other times you need to remove this caliper so everything will, and set it off to the side so you have clearance for the tire to slide through, especially if you're running dual brakes on the front. Okay, if you're going to use an impact, air impact driver, I don't know if a lot of you know this, but it's always good to throw a little bit of oil down there, like 2 or 3 drops down inside. It just makes these last a little longer. So we're gonna pull this loose. Also at this time we're gonna remove the fender and all these little components here, because we are gonna take this apart and put in new stem bearings here. These are a 13 millimeter on the fender. Okay, we're going to remove these lower fender brace bracket bolts. And that fender slides right off. Alright, top clamp on this side is loose. You know, I might even have some boots that'll work on that. Fork boots. These are a little cracked. So that'd be a good time to, while we're changing the oil and everything else in this thing, and I believe this lower one is a 17 millimeter. There we go. So sometimes these will come out easy and sometimes they won't. This one seems to be coming out easy. Okay, one fork, we'll clean that up. We'll pop the top off here. We'll remove this plug right here, this little screw, and drain these and put new fluid in there. All right, second one. Ooh, yeah, we're definitely, I don't know, let me show you here. This one's been leaking and whatever, so they've wrapped tape around it. I'm pretty sure I've got some new boots for that. I think what we'll do is we'll drop this headlight out of the way. Looks like it's missing a bolt, so I have to put another one in there when I put it back together. So now we're going to remove these front headlight mounts. And this headlight housing should just come right off. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to clean all this up inside and out and make sure everything's good and clean before I put the new races in. Putting in those races are pretty easy. I just made up a little tool for packing that up in there. Just a piece of tubing. And the top one, it stands up a little bit, but that's just the way it is. And then that I just used my hammer, and I took my time and I didn't bang hard on it. What we're doing is we're draining the tubes. I removed the small screw to let the fluid drain out. Plus I removed the cap off the top of the fork. And now we're just going to let it drain. Okay, since we've gotten the fork now drained out, we're going to end up putting that screw back in at the base. Want to make sure you wipe off any residual oil and everything down in here. You don't want that all over the place. Okay, I'm going to lower this fork down a little bit. Now what I set up here is I have it the triple tree. This is a spare that I had that'll fit these 34 millimeter forks. So I just clamped that up in a vise, and then I clamped the leg in there to work on it to remove everything. One of the things on this TX, these are the springs on it. I was going to get some progressive, but I decided what I'm going to do. This is the original spacer that goes in there, and it's about 3.5 inches long. And so what I did is I made a spacer up 4.5 inches long out of just some electrical conduit, plastic conduit. One thing you want to do is you want to make sure that all these little fiber pieces like this that are in there are cleaned out. But anyway, yeah, I'm just going to stick this in, and it'll give a little bit more pressure on the springs. Plus I'm using this Lucas fork oil. This is a 15 weight heavy. They suggest in the book that you run 1030. But being a 15 weight straight, I think you're probably pretty darn close there on what you need. I like the synthetic oil, seems to ride a little better. So what I've done here on this model, it takes 155 cc's or about 5.25 ounces. So what I've done is I put that in my measuring cup, and then I'm going to put this all together, put the fluid in there, and then I'll show you how to get this pushed down on there a little easier than trying to push it down with your hand. Okay, I'm going to add the fork oil. I have my little pouring device here. No, I didn't steal this from my wife in her kitchen. I actually bought this for the shop. I don't think it's a safe thing to do, to be stealing measuring devices for fork oil out of your wife's kitchen. Could be quite dangerous. So local hardware had some. What the heck. So now I'm going to put the spring in. When I put the fluid in, I like to pump these up a little bit. That's what happened here. I got a little fluid. Didn't let it sit long enough. Pump this up so it gets the fluid down in the lower extremities of the fork tube. There's a little spacer that you want to put in there. It drops in there. and that sits on top of the fork spring itself. This cap goes down. Now you can push these down on there, but it sometimes can be difficult. So what I've come up with is an old C-clamp, and I welded on a little piece of tubing on there this pretty much fits everywhere up to, I believe, 40 millimeter without too much problem. I use a hose clamp on there to hold it in place. I take my unit that I need to install, then you're just basically screwing this thing down on there, and it sometimes can be a little difficult to line up, but you want to work it down in there safely. So what I'll do is I'll run it down till I feel it touch the thread. So now we're going to turn this, and at the same time screw down on this unit, and eventually the threads will take over. And you just take your time at this. Don't get in a hurry. And rocking it back and forth so you don't really get this thing to cross thread. See, now it's taken over and it's screwing down in there. So it's a pretty easy way of putting these caps on. You can still do this while it's in the frame, while it's all together. This would just slide underneath the top part of the triple tree, and the hose clamp, of course, you'd have to take it apart to put it on there. But yeah, you could do it that way there too. And then you just screw these down until you get ready for it to be tightened. All right, so this tube is ready to install in the triple tree. And what I have to do is I have to drain the other tube and start the process all over again. So also on these spacers, when you make the other style, you make them a little longer. If they feel too stiff for you, you can always cut them down, or you can just put the stock ones back in. But you could play with how much pressure. I want it a little bit stiffer front end because we are going to be using this a little bit off-road. So now for this lower bearing that I put on, I've already pre-greased it up. I did it by hand. To get that down the rest of the way, which I ended up doing, is I have a piece of 1/2 inch and a half tubing here that is fairly heavy wall, and you can see that drives down in there. Now the old bearing that were on here, ball bearings, all I did is I took a little punch and worked around this and knocked it loose, and it came right off. So now this is actually ready to go back up in the head. I still have to grease the top bearing. And basically all I'm doing is I'm applying grease around here. You're just kind of, once you get it kind of spushed in down here in this lower lip, just spin it a little bit and keep working it. And then you'll have another little lip up here in this upper edge. Try to get it down in that area. I use a good quality grease here. This is that full synthetic, and it seems to work quite well. So I'm gonna go put this in the top race. Now I've just screwed this all together fit. I put the top bearing in and put the little cap on and the tightener down on it. So what we're going to do is we're going to snug this down, and I like to snug them down fairly tight and then rock them back and forth. You don't want to over tighten them, but what you want to do is you want to play with this a little bit just to see how it feels. Now I know some of you are looking out here, well, this whole setup is a little different than what I got. So hang on, I'll bring down the other one. So most of you probably have one that looks like this with a double cap. And basically all this is going to do is once you tighten down against this bearing, this one helps lock it in place. And then your tupper triple tree slides over this area, and then that holds it down in place. Where on this one, the different model on this slides down over that big piece. That goes on there. I don't know if you can see that, but this is the little clicker. So when you do the tension tighten up on this, just to help, you know, the steering, that goes on. And then the nut. And that's the only difference basically, is that these help lock the fork, because they upgraded. This is an upgrade. The double lock helps lock that into place. But this one here uses this clamp to help lock that all and keep it stable. Okay, one thing you want to pay attention on these, when you're putting these forks in, you're sliding them up, that they slide in easy. If they don't want to fit in this top triple tree easy, you got to jam them in. That could mean that the fork is either bent or one of these triple trees is bent. That's a good indication anyway. One thing you want to do is you want to make sure this top clamp is loose. These bolts here are loose when you tighten down the locking cap. I'm going to use my adjustable metric wrench here, and we'll snug this down. Now you can go along and tighten up your top clamps. And I like to bring these caps just so that where that cap edge is right at the top of the triple tree itself. A lot of times what guys will do on their cafe bikes is that they want to drop the look of the bike. You can literally let these slide up and then do your clamps, either do your clip-on style clamps, handlebars here or on top if it's let through enough. All right, top clamps are set. Now these lowers can be tightened up. So this can now be screwed down. This is the adjustment for what that is, there's a drag plate underneath here that allows friction. So you can tighten this up if you want a stiffer front end. That puts a lot of drag on it. So you can loosen it up or tighten it down. We're going to static balance this tire. I've determined at this point here is the lightest point, because this would be the heaviest point. And how you determine that, if you were to sit and let that wheel rock back down, you can see that it's going to pull that point right back up in there. So as fast as it's turning, and over the years that I've done this, it's not going to take much weight to balance this out. So we've got a 1 ounce here that we're going to put on. So I cut it in half, and it's pretty darn close there. So I get to clean up the spokes and the rim a little bit. So you don't need to watch that. The chain that I have for that excess over there is a little bit too long. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out one of these lengths. So the way I like to do it, you just grind those tops right off there. Now I realize a lot of you don't have one of these chain length removers. You know, in the past I didn't have one either. So basically all I really did is I just put this up in a vise. I have a punch that would fit those inner there. after grinding it off, and then all you got to do is just drive that thing down, and boom, comes off. So now we have the length has been, we've removed one length out of that chain. In the process of putting a new tire on, I also put on a new rear sprocket, which this is a 34 and I'm running a 17 tooth forward. I use these RK chains. I kind of like them. I've used them for years. They seem to hold up quite well. I don't know if a lot of you out there know it, but when you're putting on one of these master links, the little clip doesn't go like this. So when it goes around, it goes like this. And why you do it that way is because this could get caught and be knocked off. So putting that link snap on properly really makes a difference. Put that on there and then tap down on it. Then make sure that that's in both those grooves there. So now I'm going to adjust this chain up. Also on these, there are little marks along the swing arm axle area that you can line up with the little mark on here. On both sides, you equal out. Another way that I do it is I'll find a point up front that is the same on both sides, and then I will measure between those deals and the center of the axle and measure both sides, and then it should be straight then, because you're measuring off the swing arm front pivot and the axle, so you're lining everything up. Hope that helped. To adjust these, to pull that axle one way or the other, is depending on how you screw this adjusting screw either out or in. Now I've got the axle tightened down here a bit. Then you just run that up, and then that locks these in place. And usually these are a 10 millimeter, and that's a 12. And it could be a 13 millimeter. I'm not sure. Depends on the bike and who's messed with it. Now, a lot of times when I'm adjusting these chains, this is a new chain, and I think it's about right. I usually get about an inch of travel here on the base. We don't have any weight really on this bike, so once that swing arm goes up, it's going to tighten up. If it's a new chain, you need to run them a little bit to kind of stretch them out and clear out, because they'll be tight because they'll have grease and everything in all these little link joints. So it will loosen up anyway. So you want to get, I don't know, 100 miles on it and then come back and recheck it again as it is. And then you should be good for a while. One thing I like to do after I've gotten the nut on the axle nut all tightened up and everything's in position is to put in a new cotter pin, and that's just a safety thing. You'll find that the old ones may break or whatever. This one had a really crappy one, so I'm going to end up putting in a new one. All that does is it just keeps that nut from backing off. I usually pack some with me on the road, just for the fact that if I need to adjust this, and this does break when I take it off. Anyway, after adjusting the nut and tightening it down, put a brand new cotter pin in there. Well, I hope you liked this episode. And if you have any comments, either put them in the comment section below, or questions, or you can send them to my email address at tmiyagi@hotmail.com. So if you liked it, please like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that ringy-dingy button so you can get the next notification on a video coming up. So y'all be safe out there and hope to see you on the road. This is Mr. Miyagi signing off. Ciao.